Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, chapter 31. That's Perek Lamed Aleph. And today we will complete what is known as the first book of Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, as we read about the unfortunate and tragic end of the career and life of the first king of Israel, that is King Saul, Shaul. The division of the book of Samuel into two books is an artificial one, and later in history and traditional Judaism, there is just the book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel. But this does nonetheless uh, have a logical conclusion here because it is the end of Shaul's life. Um, and So if you're going to divide it into two books for convenience purposes, this is a reasonable chapter to end the first book. So just to remind us, the Navi here lays out a contrast between David and Saul, which is very important um, to illustrate what's really happening here, this time of transition between the kingdom of Saul and the kingdom of David. We just studied how David was in an extremely dire situation. His his protector Achish had sent him back from the battlefield because the Philistines, where David was had been seeking refuge, didn't trust him. So David realized he could never get um, fully be trust the Philistines. He would need to come back to Israel at some point soon. He came back to Ziklag, his town. It was devastated, burned to the ground, and all of the families, the women and children, had been taken captive. His men had completely lost confidence in him and his leadership and were ready to stone him. And David stood up to the occasion, rose to the occasion, had faith in God, and went forward and rescued all the families, rescued the people, and reestablished his leadership and the people's trust in him. And not only did he reestablish his band of people that trusted in him, he was able to repay all of those that had done him favors over the years while he was running from Saul, and basically set up the foundations, certainly within his tribe of Judah, his future kingdom. At the same time, Saul is getting ready for battle, and Saul was desperate. So in Saul's time of desperation, he went to a necromancer. He tried to summon the spirit of Samuel to bring up tried to get the angels of the past, so to speak, to help him and fight for him, but the angels of the past were not willing to do so. Shmuel was gone. Shmuel was no longer supporting him. Samuel was no longer there to help him. God was no longer there to help him. Even the evil dark forces were no longer there to help him. But Saul was still not ready and willing to recognize his fate, to recognize that God no longer wanted him to be king. The people no longer trusted him as king. But he still was unwilling to work with David. So here, now we head back to Saul and we will read about the tragic end of his life. Uflishtim nilchamim Israel, and the Philistines were waging war against the people of Israel. Vayanusu, and doesn't give us too many details about the battle, except that the Anshe Israel, the people of the men of Israel, ran and fled from before the Philistines. The war was a rout. The war was a tremendous victory for the Philistines and tremendous defeat for the people of Israel. Vayiplu chalalim bahar ha-Gilboa, and on Mount Gilboa, the corpses, the dead soldiers of Israel fell. Vayadbeku Philistine, and Philistines, a group of Philistine soldiers cornered or actually chased at Shaul Panav, Saul and his sons. And it's not clear from this verse, but it'll seem to be clear from later, that they were just chasing them as Israelite soldiers. Apparently, they weren't really aware that this was Saul and the king and his sons. Vayaku Philistine et Yehonasan, and during this chase and this battle, the Philistines struck down and killed Jonathan. That's Yehonasan, the crown prince, the one who was close with David. He reached his unfortunate death here. Viet Avinadav and his brother Avinadav, Viet Malchishua, his other brother Malchishua, Bnei Shaul, all three were the sons of Saul. We're going to learn that Saul has other sons that did survive, but these are the three main ones that we were aware of until now, and these were just unfortunately killed in battle. And the battle became heavier against Saul. He became cornered by the Philistines chasing him. Hamorim anoshim bakoshes, and a group of archers um, found him and caught him. Vayochel ma'od mehamorim, and he was hurt. Yochel here means he could be that he was afraid, um, but in this context, it more likely means and he was struck by the archers, but not yet uh, uh, mortally wounded, but wounded so that he was hurt significantly. Um, the Vayomer Shaul Nosei Kilav, and Saul said to his assistant, the one who was standing with him, the one who held his weapons, Shalof Charbecha v'dokreni ba, pull out your sword and stab me, kill me with your sword. Saul knew that at this point it was inevitable that he was going to be taken captive. He was injured, he couldn't fight, he couldn't run. And on the one hand, he was afraid of being taken captive because, as the enemy king, he would have endured a tremendous amount of humiliation and torture. And also, to a degree, he was afraid for the honor of Israel. Having the king taken captive would be a tremendous moral and a tremendous blow to the morale. Is the word I was meant to use. The morale of the people. So he said, just kill me. Maybe these arelim, this is these uncircumcised ones, meaning these non-Jews, these non-Israelites are going to come. Udikaruni hit alalubi. They will be the ones who stab me, and they will make fun of me. They will torture me. Hitalalu meaning is a way of making light of me. They will embarrass and shame me. Below avano se kelab ki but his the one who was bearing, the one who held his weapons, refused to do it because he was afraid. He was afraid to kill the king. Vayikach Shaul et acherev. So Saul took the sword on his own, vayipol and he fell upon the sword, and thus killed himself. Um, Vayar nosei kelov kimei Shaul, and the one who carried his weapon saw that Saul had died, that he had killed himself. Vayipol gam hu al charbo, and he himself also committed suicide, fell on his sword by Yamas Imo, and died together with his king Saul. Vayamas Shaul shloshet banav v'nosei kelav. So Saul and his three sons and his arms bearer, all of them died. Gam kol anashav bayomu yachtav. All of them died together, and all of his men. This presumably doesn't mean all of the soldiers of Israel, but many of whom had retreated and ran. But all of his men, the close soldiers to Saul, all died on that day. Vayiru anshe Yisrael asher be'ever ha'emek, and the people of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, asher be'ever Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan River, they saw ki nasu anshe Yisrael. They saw that the people of Israel had retreated, and they also saw v'chimesu Shaul banov, their leader, their king Saul, and his sons had died. Vayazvu et ha'arim vayanusu. And all of those that lived in towns and villages in the area saw this terrible defeat, and they abandoned their villages and ran, obviously afraid that the Philistines were going to come and attack them and harm them. So they left their homes behind, their towns behind. Vayavo Philistine vayeshu vahen, and the Philistines came and settled in those towns, as was the way of wars and battles in those days. Vayimi macharas, the next day came. And this is where it seems evident that the Philistines themselves were not aware that Saul had been or had died, or had been the one that was cornered and had died by a bow. The Philistines came to strip the corpses, to get the weapons of the soldiers that had died, and any valuables they might have had. So they came uh, to take it from them. Vayimtzu et Shaul, and among the dead they found the body of Saul himself, yet Shloshet Banav, and his three sons, Noflim b'Hara Gilboa, who had fallen and died on Hara Gilboa, on Mount Gilboa. Vayichrusu et Rosho, they cut off his head. Vayafshitu et Kelov, and they stripped him of his royal garments. Vayishalchu b'Eretz Plishtim, and they sent Saul's head through the land of the Philistines, Saviv, to pass around, Levaser Beit Atzabehem Yata'am, to to spread the news among their houses of idol worship, their temples, and among the nation and the people, to show the victory that we killed their king, or their king is dead. Vayasimu et Kelov, and they put his garments, his armor, etc. Beit Ashtarot. They put it in the temple of Ashtarot. Ashtarot is a an idol which came had been mentioned many times, and it's a name of a god in many Middle Eastern religions. It's this origin of the word Ishtar, and has various forms, and it's also interestingly enough the origin of the name Esther, and so on. But in their idol worshipping temple to Ashtaroth, they put Saul's garments and hung it there, v'et gviato, and his body tak'u b'chomat Beit Shan. They impaled his body in the wall of the town of Beit Shan. Now, if you back in the beginning of Saul's career, in the heyday when Saul was doing well, when Saul was riding the top of the wave, when he had just been appointed king, when he was the rescuer of the people, when he was finally the king who stood up to the Philistines and rescued the people of Israel. If you remember, one of the first groups of people that he very valiantly and heroically saved were the residents of Gilad, of Yavesh Gilad. So these people were still very grateful to Saul and what he had done to rescue them, and to them this was a huge blow. Vayishmu elav Yoshvei Yavesh Gilad, the residents of Yavesh Gilad heard about him, Et asher asu Philistine l'Shaul, that which the Philistines had done to Saul, that they had so abused his body and made it into a laughing stock. And they were very upset about this. So Vayakumu Kol Ish Chayil, all the men of valor, the strong soldiers of Yavesh Gilad, they got up, they armed themselves by Yelchu Kol Halayla, and they traveled all night. This was in a final act of honor to Saul, who had saved them in the past. Remember, these last few chapters, we talked so much about the end of Saul's career, his arrogance, his unwillingness to accept his fate, his unwillingness to work with David, his his um his insecurities, and the reasons why he failed. But we tend to forget that Saul, in the beginning of his career, was the savior, was the king who stood up to the Philistines, the king who united the people of Israel, saved them from their enemies, and rose. We forget that. We have to remember he was the first king that actually stood up and established a nation of Israel, established a monarchy, and so on. And the people of Yavesh Gilad will never forget that which he did for them in the beginning of his career, and wanted to do honor to him by honoring his body. They traveled all night, and they took Saul's body, and the bodies of his sons, Mechomat Beit Shan. They took them down. Apparently, the Saul's sons' bodies were also impaled and hanging at the walls of the city of Beit Shan by Avohu Yavesha. And they came to Yavesha, which is their home, by Yisrafu Osam Sham, and they cremated them. They burned the bodies there by Yechuat Satmotehem, and they took the bodies, the remains after they were burned. Even though cremation is not something that's generally practiced in Judaism, presumably here this was done because they knew that as long as the bodies were extant, as long as they remained, uh, the the potential for the Philistines to abuse them existed, so cremation would have been a much better honor. So it kind of makes sense that they chose this route. They took the remainder of the bones, the burned bones, by and they buried them under an Eshel tree, a type of tree, a tamarisk, in Yavesh. And it's fitting that Saul's body should rest in a place where where one of the greatest moments of his career occurred. One of the greatest moments of his heroism and his bravery and his courage and his dedication to the people occurred here in Yavesh Gilad. It makes sense that his memory should be a good memory. His memory should be an honorable memory. His memory should not be one of his failures, but rather one of his successes. And it's important at the end of his life to recall those successes and to honor those successes. And that is what the people of Yavesh Gilad wanted to do. By Yatsumu Shivat Yamim, and for 7 days they fasted as part of their ritual of mourning, to give him a proper, honorable send off. This concludes the career of Saul, the second book of Samuel. We pick up again with David as David starts to build his own monarchy and becomes the second king of the United Kingdom of Israel. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. Looking forward to studying book 2 of Samuel, Shmuel Bet, and looking forward, of course, to continuing our study of the words of the prophets. Have a wonderful day.